Hello everyone, this is Darcinovia here. This is my review on the fifth book of the Stargazer series, Enigma. Now, it's been a long time since I reviewed any of these books. I have a really bad habit of starting a book and taking forever to finish it. But eventually I do, and well, Enigma is a book that I started not that long ago, and yeah, I'm done with it. Finished it within a few days after a lot of procrastinating. So, what do I think of this book of the series? Well, I make it no secret that I've really enjoyed the Stargazer series. As a fan of Star Trek The Next Generation, and as a fan of Jean-Luc Picard, I really enjoy reading about Picard's early years, before he became the seasoned captain that we all know on screen. And this just continues the thread of seeing young Picard's development as a captain and as a Starfleet officer, and seeing him going through a lot of difficulty with an admiral that wants to relieve him of command because of whatever mistakes he makes. And you have a storyline that goes on in this book with a storyline with his best friend and first officer, Ben Sorma, forcing to work with the admiral that seeks his removal. And what I really like about this book is, in all books of the Stargazer series, it feels like a Star Trek episode that you would see in a typical Star Trek series. Now, at the very start of this series, you do have one of the characters who, a few novels ago, ended up falling in love with one of the people that look like members of his crew who came from the Mirror Universe, Nicholas, and he resigned because he couldn't deal with it. Now, I'm pretty sure the next book in the series, Maker, will conclude this story arc that he's been going through since that book. Now, I think this book is definitely a story that I really enjoyed. It was just like the rest of the Stargazer series. It felt reasonably paced. I love the small character moments with the characters in this book, and I know none of these characters, with the exception of Picard, will have appeared on screen, but it's really nice. This series actually has sold me on reading about Star Trek characters that only exist in print form. In fact, it made me want to check out it made me want to check out the New Frontier series, which that will come another day. But I think the characters, the little moments in this book, is something I appreciate, and these characters do feel human. Michael John Friedman does a great job of writing characters, believable characters, and reading Picard, the first time of him working with other captains of Starfleet in order to deal with a potential war with another unknown alien species, was something that I enjoyed seeing, and we got a chance to see the person that we would ultimately see on screen with Picard, of him figuring out other solutions besides the first option. His friend Ben Sorma, we saw how his initiative actually helped Picard from entering into a conflict that they could not possibly win by uncovering one of their officers wasn't really with them the entire time. It was a spy. And, well, that part wasn't as important, but the thing I will say is, I should have said this in my early Stargazer, videos, but I'll say it here. I think the Stargazer series was one of those series that I feel like would have been a great TV show, and it's kind of a shame that they haven't done it. I mean, the Lost Era of Star Trek. For those of you who don't know what the Lost Era is, it's an era that takes place in between the Undiscovered Country and the first episode of the Next Generation. There's like so many areas where you could tell stories, whether on screen or in print form. Most of it has been print form. We have gotten glimpses from some episodes in Star Trek The Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine of the Lost Era, but we barely have gotten that much of it. And I really do like reading about this era because it's very interesting. It's an unknown era that's untapped, that's barely been explored. Now, the reason why I say this is relevant is the Stargazer series doesn't have that many books, unfortunately. After this, I only have one more novel in the series itself. And I really enjoyed reading the development that Picard and his crew have gone through throughout this entire series. I think Ben Sorma is a great character. I think Picard, in this era is an interesting character to read about. And Picard was on the Stargazer for a very long time. And I think they could have told as many stories as they told with the New Frontier series, but it was never meant to be. Enigma, in itself, is another one of these novels that make me hungry for more. I am hungry for more Stargazer books. But unfortunately, I only have one more in this series itself, and that is the Maker, the last book of this series. There are other books that have the Stargazer crew in some form, like Reunion, which actually was published before these novels, and Reculum, and one of the post-Nemesis books, and the Tales of the Dominion War do feature characters from the Stargazer novels. But other than that, there isn't that many stories with these characters in them. And according to the literary verse, Ben Sorma is supposed to be Picard's best friend, yet where is he? What? Of course, I understand that these novels aren't canon. I understand that. But I consider the literary verse a iteration of Star Trek. And I've actually grown to really enjoy this iteration of Star Trek over the years. It explores things that the shows cannot explore, but that's a topic for a different time. Maker is the final book of the Stargazer series, begins where the last novel leaves off. 2 storylines. For like the first 75% of this book is mostly about Nicholas and the crew of the Stargazer preventing an entity that has the godlike powers and could potentially have offspring of people like him. And what I really like about this story is I like how it actually developed the original characters in the Stargazer series. I know some of them were introduced in the novel Reunion, but I really have grown to actually, enjoy the characters in the Stargazer series, even though there aren't that many more stories featuring them, unfortunately. But what time I do have with them, I've actually, enjoyed them. Nicholas's storyline is essentially, at least his part, is dealing with this entity who messes with his head. He essentially conjures up the woman that he loves, and he basically witnessed her essentially vanishing all over again, which fucks with him. And Picard, dealing with other stuff regarding a woman that betrayed him earlier in the series. And this is one of those Star Trek stories. It's something you could expect from typical Trek. At least the majority of this novel deals with the crew of the Stargazer along with Nicholas trying to stop an alien entity from basically destroying the universe, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's typical classic Star Trek where you have things that could ultimately destroy the universe. But you know what? I enjoy that sort of thing. It wouldn't be Star Trek without it. And the thing I really enjoy is I do like the little small moments we get from the characters that are featured in the Stargazer novels that aren't featured on screen. And what makes this a shame, and I'll bring this up in the final section, there's so much room for more adventures for these characters, and it's unfortunate that their stories pretty much end here. But I'm going to get to the other portion, is regarding the moment that this series has building to since the first book, Gauntlet, where Picard goes through a hearing to determine if he should command the Stargazer, and everything that has been reviewed since the first novel of the series is determining the fate of Picard as a captain of Starfleet. Though we all know from the Next Generation, he's not going to be relieved of command. But this moment of the series has been building up since Gauntlet, because one of the characters he's recurring, MacArthur, doesn't like Picard and wants him relieved of command. And he's been antagonistic towards him throughout the entire series. I guess you could consider him one of the main antagonists of the Stargazer's novels. And of course, we all know Picard doesn't lose command of the Stargazer, and he's allowed to continue commanding the Stargazer until he ultimately would lose it about 2 decades later. Now, I didn't spend much time talking about this novel because, in all honesty, this is essentially, a continuation of Enigma. And considering the fact that I don't think I did the Stargazer series justice, I'm just going to give my final thoughts on the Stargazer novels as a whole. From the first novel, The Variant, we are introduced to a young Jean-Luc Picard at the age of 28 taking command of the Stargazer. Now, these novels were written at a time where the Star Trek literary verse was starting to go the Star Wars Legends route and starting to build an interconnected universe where everything is more connected. It isn't a bunch of, stories that are kind of disconnected, and you could basically read one book and not read the other and not be lost. This is at a time when the Star Trek expanded universe started to feel more alive. This is what I love about this book, is the connections to other works of the Star Trek literary verse. And even though I haven't read Reunion as of this recording, because I wanted to read the other book that these characters were in, I really do like how the Stargazer novels stand completely on their own. As long as you are familiar with the Next Generation and you've seen the episodes that are about Picard and his various instances where he had some trouble with Starfleet Command, and even mention of his trial with the Stargazer, I actually was intrigued by this. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I suck out the Stargazer novels in the first place, because I really, really, really wanted to read about a young Jean-Luc Picard. Now, when I started reading the Star Trek literary verse, it was one of my first books. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, because I didn't really care about reading about characters that weren't featured in the shows. And of course, I was still heavily into the Star Wars expanded universe, and I just wanted to focus on characters from the shows. But as I read the Stargazer series and the Star Trek Deep Space Nine relaunch novels, I've actually grown accustomed to reading about characters that are not featured in the shows. And the characters in the Stargazer novels are really well-developed characters, despite the fact they're not featured in many stories. And considering that a huge chunk of Picard's life is on the Stargazer, it's such a shame that the series ends with Maker. Yeah, they would be featured in a few other works here and there, but they're not featured in that much. And it's really sad, because I would have really have loved to have seen, Ben Soma and characters like Nicholas and all those others featured in more works. I think they're really good characters. I guess they didn't want to use characters made by Michael John Friedman. I don't know. It's sad. I really enjoyed the Stargazer novels. I think the way the last book ended, there was more room for adventures. I would have really have loved to see the crew of the Stargazer grow and develop. I really would have loved to see how these characters become respected Starfleet captains, admirals, whatever they are. I don't know, because I haven't read Reunion as of this recording, and I would have really have loved to see that. There's 20 years worth of adventures these people went on, and it's a shame that there wasn't any more adventures with these characters. That's it. 6 novels, 7 if you count the variant, and this is all we get out of the Stargazer series. As someone that really loves reading about more adventures and reading about expanded material in franchises that I love, I've been a fan of Star Trek for quite some time now, and Stargazer is an interesting era, easily be told in books or television. We know how Picard's story was going to end, obviously, but I was so intrigued by this premise that it's a shame. A young Jean-Luc Picard, I would have loved to at least read maybe a few more books before this series closed. But what's done is done. Star Trek was going a new direction at the time. A lot of the focus for the novels was the post-Nemesis era that was about to be launched with Death in Winter and the first novel of Titan. So anything that featured the next generation characters was mostly going to be in the post-Nemesis novels. So I can understand that. It's a shame. As for this review, yeah, I know I merged these 2 reviews as one, but I felt like there wasn't enough material to talk about, and I wasn't going to do another injustice to the Stargazer series. If you are a Star Trek fan, especially of the Next Generation, I would check these books out. The Variant is probably the place you should start if you intend to read Stargazer. I think they're really good reads. It's a shame that they ended the series right when I felt like it could have been something else. Whatever. I have New Frontier if I want to read some Star Trek novels that don't feature characters from the show, and I might do that. Anyway, my next review is going to be Reunion, a novel that I've been eagerly waiting to read for years. Anyway, this is Darcenovia. May we all live long and prosper.